57talk.com. Gary Cubetta back again, Scottsdale, Arizona, early morning. My pleasure, part 2, Erik Watts. Erik, great to have you back.
Man, it's good to be back.
You like the first show?
Yeah, I love the first show, man. Loved it.
Got to keep you happy, Now, I want to talk about your early career in WCW, a very controversial time in wrestling. Of course, you've heard it 1,000 times, the nepotism claim. I want to talk a little bit about how you got into wrestling. Before that, you were quarterback at Louisville, and you weren't just like a third or fourth stringer. You were a starter in your senior year.
Yeah, I mean that was an issue, and that's a story in itself. So probably don't want to get into too many details, but there were some issues there towards my junior year and out of my control. And the coach had gotten upset with some people, on my team as far as like family and things like that. And therefore, from what I understand, for me starting, actually my sophomore year, instead of me starting, a guy named Browning Nagel started instead, and it had to do with personal issues between the coach and my father, and some ridiculous allocation. Matter of fact, I was going to transfer my sophomore year to Purdue, and everything was going great. Plan starter. I knew when I came in there, the offense, such a complicated offense, is phenomenal. It was like our offensive playbook was like a yellow page, and there was a guy named John Gruden that was starting at the time, Jay Gruden, that was starting at the time, which is the brother of John Gruden, which of course most people know is the Monday night analyst, and the coach of Tampa Bay, and I believe the coach was at the Oakland Raiders when they won the World Championship. So I stepped aside at the time to allow Nagel to start. He started off and on, and then he went, first pick, second round to the New York Jets, and then I started my senior year.
Yeah, and a lot of people may not remember this, but Browning Nagel was at the time considered the potential and possible successor to Joe Willie Namath with the New York Jets, and he played college football with you, and in fact, you may have started if the issues with your dad and the coach hadn't come up, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, if anyone goes back to the press clippings and looks at the Louisville sports press clippings, there is no doubt. I mean, as far as spring games, summer games, red and white games, as we call them, I was by far the standout quarterback. As a matter of fact, they had an issue my original freshman year. Coach Schnellenberger had told my dad that the playbook was so intense and so thick that no matter what, they wanted to redshirt me my freshman year. That was the plan going in. Besides the fact that, Louisville, when I chose Louisville, it was an oddity in its own because I didn't even know Louisville had a football team. I was being recruited by every team in the nation. I was one of the top 10 recruits in the nation that year. We had video press conference, TV, everything when I signed. However, having that been said, Schnellenberger pitched me like no other. He showed me his history of quarterback, Namath, Kelly, Kozar, Testaverde, so on and so on. It was unbelievable. And I chose to go there. My freshman year, or my redshirt freshman year, I stood out so much. From what they say, I'm not saying this. From what they said, they had 13 quarterbacks there. They had 7, I believe, 6 or 7 scholarship quarterbacks, 6 walk-ons, and I made it within 3 weeks. I was the number 2 quarterback. And Coach Schnellenberger at the time had an issue with that because he was like, whoa, what are we going to do? So we went back into meetings saying that if anything happened to Gruden, that I may have to forego my redshirt year and start as a freshman. And we had those meetings. He did not get hurt. He did not get injured. I traveled on every game, which is odd as a redshirt freshman. So on the depth chart, it showed whomever, but I was the number 2 quarterback to go in at any time. And it's all fate and timing. Johnny Unitas was one of his quarterbacks too. Matter of fact, when I left Louisville, I was handed the Johnny Unitas Award, and Mrs. Unitas actually came to the banquet and personally handed me the Johnny Unitas Award, which was incredible. So, I'm not mad. I'm not upset either way about politics. politics has its hand in everything. Just as some people would say politically, without my father, I'd never be in wrestling. But that's for the viewer to say or not say, and decide or not decide. I want a viewer to point out someone that's 23, 24, that has 21 days of wrestling school, that comes out and performs like I did. I'm not saying I'm the world's best, but I will say that even looking back, because I'm my worst critic, looking back, I don't know many kids that can sit there and say, man, 21 days of training, TV their fourth match. Wow, because I was hard on myself, very hard on myself. But now looking back at it and seeing how long these guys get to train and how long they stay in a school and all of that, I mean, good God, if I would have had a year and a half, 2 years in a school, stop it. It was crazy. But
well, Erik, I'm going to interrupt you because this is 57talk.com, and I'm going to be the judge and jury. And I saw you wrestle in 1992. I saw your dad take over WCW. I saw what he was trying to do. And first of all, we've established that you were a terrific athlete, which a lot of guys getting into professional wrestling, they don't have anywhere near the credentials that you had. Second, you're 6'6", 268 pounds. That's unique in itself. Third, your dad is probably one of the 5 greatest, maybe the 10 greatest professional wrestlers, most influential people in the history of professional wrestling. So, and again, like I said, I saw you wrestle, and you were not great when you started at first, but you were good enough. And then, of course, all the claims came in about your dad's influence. Now, I want to go back, and we're going to talk about this, but I want to go back to when you started with WCW. How excited was your dad about the opportunity to come into WCW?
Well, my father, being the genius and the businessman he is, I could honestly tell you that how he felt or didn't feel about going into WCW was never reflected in the conversation with me. My dad is as old school as they get, and if anyone thinks that my dad reported into me about how he felt and didn't feel, they are sadly mistaken, my friend. I'm sure, or he wouldn't have taken the job, that his love, his interest, his focus for what they asked him to do was there. Monetarily, my dad's a genius, so I'm sure, he was compensated accordingly. However, talks between me and my father didn't even go on about wrestling. As a matter of fact, I was under a complete different scrutiny. Dusty Rhodes and Gagne's and Graham's were actually the ones that were watching me at the school. And again, I don't know if we covered this, but when I went down to that school, it was not to try out or get ready to wrestle. It was that I had not been allowed my whole career to be in the ring prior to having a degree. And what I'd planned on doing was going down for the 21, 23 days, go just work out in between classes, go finish my master's, and then I was going to either go to Japan or go train more with Jody Hamilton. That was my plan. No one else had spoken to other plans. And on my way back to college to go back to school, Dusty Rhodes is the one that called me and asked me would I wrestle 3 events on the way back, and which was quite odd because I had no outfit, I had no anything. So that's how all that happened. And as far as my dad's concerned, he never showed or even talked to me about wrestling. I was just at Jody Hamilton school working out and loving life.
Erik, we're gonna talk about your dad at the time. The wrestling sheets, the Wrestling Observer and Pro Wrestling Torch, they were very pro your father getting the opportunity at WCW. They had seen the past regime they had failed. WCW was floundering. Your dad comes in, he gets the opportunity, and this was the first time that I really started to question where the sheets were coming from, because they were so excited to see him get in, but as soon as he did get in, they started to rip all his efforts apart. And I've interviewed your dad about this, and he's still shaking his head. He doesn't really know what happened because he wanted to work with Turner. You said you didn't really talk to your dad that much about it. Was it that your dad is that just his personality, or did he not want the family in on the wrestling business?
Oh, no. I mean, if my dad totally had his way, I would have probably started at 17 or 18, just like most of Von Erichs and Wyndham's and Rhodes and so many other people. But I think we covered this. I'm not sure, but what we had an agreement that no child was supposed to touch the ring prior to having a degree, because in the 70s and 80s, late 60s, 70s, and 80s, when my father was wrestling, you could probably count on your hand in all 23 or 24 territories who had a degree. So, one injury, one bump, one major mishap, and you have nothing to fall back on. My father went to college. He did not receive his degree military, but he went straight from college to pro football. My mother either. She went to modeling, and she was a major model. Matter of fact, that's how they hooked up in New York. Was they did go to the same high school, but my dad, when he was wrestling for Vince McMahon at WWF, my dad saw my mom on a billboard in downtown Madison Square Garden, the area, Times Square area, and called up the agency and found out how to get her number, and they dated after that. But no, there was a discussion and a promise and a guarantee. I mean, we had motorcycles and what were they called, Odysseys, four-wheel drives. As children, we were pretty crazy. We used to play tag with four-wheel drives and run each other over, and it was amazing. My little brother broke his neck when he was 13 on a motorcycle accident. So we were all pretty crazy. I remember when my dad said, "Are you going to play pro football?" I said yes, and I believe I was about 15 or 16 years old, and he took every motorcycle and every Odyssey and every go-kart that I had and donated them to the church. Said you can't be on a four-wheel or two-wheel a vehicle other than a car again, because when you decide to dedicate your life to something, you have to be serious. So, my idea was pro football. It was while I was at college in which, I'd still loved it. Sting would call me, Steiners would call me. People would actually call me when I was in college and say, "Hey, we're in town. We're in Louisville. Come check us out. Come talk to us." And my brother Joel was the head producer for WWF at the time. And when he would come in town, I would come see my brother Joel and we would hang out. So my love never changed. Yes, my dad's a hard ass. No, he would not ever give me his insight. Even when I was at WCW, I remember at the time when I came in, the fans were all for it, all excited. And then the sheets turned on my dad. When they turned on my dad, they started to turn on me. And I remember going to my dad and saying, "Please, man, make me a heel. Please make me a heel," which I to this day think would have been the right choice. But all I remember my father saying is, "Who does the booking here, me or you? Get the hell out of the office."
Well,
he wasn't brutal. Don't get me wrong. He wasn't brutal. He's a businessman, period.
Well,
and so, go ahead.
Erik, if you read the sheets at the time, and I'm sure you did, they made it sound like your dad coddled you as if he had the pacifier in your mouth and was protecting you at every turn. They forgot to mention that you had played at Louisville. They forgot to say you're 6'6". They forgot to say, your family's historical lineage in the wrestling business. It was just, you're only there because of your dad. Now you're telling me something totally different, and that is that your dad and you really didn't even talk about his coming to WCW at the time.
No. Matter of fact, I was watching WCW for a while and WWE at college, and it wasn't until I saw my father on the show that I knew he was even there. A matter of fact, this sounds funny. People will probably laugh about this, but one of my favorite wrestlers at the time was a guy named Scotty Flamingo, which later on became Raven. I thought he was so whacked out and so crazy at WCW, but that's what I was watching. And let's put everything into perspective. The sheets are business, and it's just like anything is from crazy as Glenn Beck or whatever you want to say, Good Morning America, to all the way to Maury Povich or what have you. So you can take the spectrum from sane to insane, and it's still a business. Now, if you think about the sheets, isn't it best for them to build someone up as a second coming and then completely destroy them? I mean, that's where the news is for those people. That's how they get their money, by controversy, by tearing down everything except for maybe a Ric Flair or whomever else.
Or anyone that feeds them enough information that, they want that flow of information to continue.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. As those people that are famous and brilliant for getting their shoulders up next to these pro wrestlers, I remember a time in which I thought I heard one of the wrestlers giving out info about the sheet, to the sheet. And I pulled them aside, and they're like, "Well, you got to be friendly to everybody." And I said, "Dude, let me explain something to you. It's not about my dad or anything else. But you know what? This is a business. You don't need to be an informant for anybody. I mean, no one likes an informant. If the sheets have plenty to talk about and plenty to say, why make it easier for them? And that wasn't me because of the scenario I was in. It's just the way I was raised. You gotta believe in something, and you gotta pick the team you're gonna be on, and then you gotta be on that team. You can't play both sides of the fence. But I will say this: there are people, there are multi-millionaires for playing both sides of the fence.
Right, and the sheet writers aren't multimillionaires, and let's not confuse that. But a lot of people, a lot of wrestling fans think that the sheets are the holy grail, and that all they care about, aside from the $10 a month, is of course to right the wrongs that have happened in the world of professional wrestling. And I remember seeing what they did to your dad, turning on him because he made a few decisions. One was that he didn't want guys going off the top rope. He also removed the pads from outside the ring. Your dad told me in the interview he did that for psychology reasons in wrestling. And what do the sheets complain about today? That there's no psychology in wrestling. And it just shows you the hypocrisy of where they're coming from at times.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I hate to tell you this, but I know people that think the Inquirer and TMZ are the news. I mean, I really do. I was laughing because I was watching, I'm trying to think about it, Will Smith and the guy that, remember the movie where the aliens were coming to the planet and oh God, Men in Black. And it was so funny because Will Smith is looking at the co-star and he's picking up Inquirer and all this other stuff. And he goes, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Well, this is the real news, kid." And I'm thinking to myself when I'm watching that, I'm thinking, oh my God, that is your dirt reading wrestling fan. They think the sheets are a shoot. And the problem, what scares me today is so many, people read them. Some of the people that are at these federations really read them, and they'll actually book and or think towards the sheet readers being the mass of your viewership, and that's so wrong.
Well, Erik, let me tell you, I've heard about that for years, and I've actually discovered it hosting these programs because it's a very strange thing. I do the programs, the people love them, the ratings keep going up and up and up, and yet we have our critics from the sheets and associated with the sheets. And I'll tell you, sometimes I sit here and I'm trying to get away from it, but I do some of the program aimed at trying to make some of these people happy, and that's always the worst part of the program. So I understand, I don't know, it's some strange psychological thing where you try and make these guys happy, but you'll never make them happy.
Well, if you think about it, and I keep saying that, but I'm saying it even to the viewers, the sheet are not too far off. And when I say they're not too far off, meaning think about the origination and the spelling of the word, okay? They're only subtract 2 letters and add 1. And you're right there. They're the shit. Period. SHITS is what it should be called. And the people that read them are what we call jabronis, marks, and or rats that want to know where we're at. Minus that, you are a very, very popular minority group. And I'm not dogging the average Joe fan. I'm saying that if you go do the market research and see the kids from 6 to 18, they're not getting the sheets, okay? 18 to 35, blah, 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 blah. They're not sheet readers, don't care at all. I mean, if these sheets were that big a deal, then they would actually be a national publicated magazine, and they'd be on a news rack.
Well, the only thing, Erik, that does make them, I don't think they are a big deal as far as numbers. I do think they're a big deal as far as influence, and they have proven that over and over again. And in fact, we're going to talk about it in a minute here. They got your dad fired from WCW, so to say they don't have influence would be incorrect. They are extremely influential. Now, let me ask you, you're in the ring with WCW as a face. I remember seeing you. I thought, obviously potential, tremendous athlete, but it takes a long time to become a great professional wrestler in the ring. Did you feel comfortable in the ring, or at times were you like, man, I'm really not sure what to do next?
Well, it has nothing to do with did I know what to do next. I mean, that's what kills me about watching wrestling today. I today could go in the ring and do 1/100th of what I used to do, but because of my own belief in myself and the controlling of the crowd, could do 1/100th and get 10 times the response. I mean, this is an art form. I don't know who goes to any kind of art school or anything else and then comes out, within 21 days or hell the first year and say, gee, I'm a chef, I'm an artist, what are you talking about? I mean, was I uncomfortable as far as my image? Yes. I didn't dictate that. They wanted me to put a Louisville jacket on, which to me was kind of Michigan, which was the Steiner brothers. and played Johnny Good. I mean, I was a quarterback, but if you go back to Louisville and you interview any of the guys from Louisville, some of them have been on WWE as hosts and so forth and so on. I was a rebel. I was a guy that was in fights. I was a guy that was out too late. I was a guy that, had a car full of chicks, and the coach was going, "Oh man, what's going wrong?" I was like the Jim McMahon of the Bears. I wasn't trying to be cool. That was just me. That's the way I ran. And when I went to WCW, it was more of a vanilla, hey, be Johnny, be good, be happy. No matter what happens, doesn't matter. You're not going to quit. Well, no shit. I wasn't going to quit anyway. But you got the wrong perspective. How about this? How about I'm going to come in, I'm going to tear into your ass. If you beat me, watch out, look over your back because I'm going to tear into your ass again. How about that attitude? Because that's more like my true attitude. So it's tough when they put you in a scenario. I would have rather been I'd have rather someone try to say, hey, why don't you switch gimmicks with Van Hammer and act like you can play the guitar? It'd have been easier for me to play the guitar, even though I've never done it, than sit around and act like I was goody two shoes coming out of college.
Well, I don't think that would have been the way to go. And of course, it's easy to say in hindsight, but if you had done something along the lines of The Rock, where the fans, started to chant Erik sucks and then had turned heel and maybe stayed heel and turned on your father and been like a Steve Austin, you're a little young for it. Maybe you needed more experience in the ring, but I could see it kind of going down that road. But those things happen more by accident than by design. So you can't really hold it against your dad. Did you try and get him to turn you heel, or didn't you guys talk that much about it?
Well, like you just said, I mean, you threw out, well, maybe the hammer thing wouldn't have worked. I was using that as a parallel, meaning that it would have been easier to take on a gimmick like a rock and roll person, a skateboarder, an astronaut, than to say, hey, be a college football player and act like goody two-shoes, first of all. Second of all, 2020 is hindsight, and you just used 2020 on yourself, talking about The Rock. I sat there and I had a little influence, believe it or not, because I do have a lot of people I know at WWE, and I actually made a call, not that this call mattered, but the whole time when they were coming in with Rocky Maivia and pushing him down the throat, I said, Jesus Christ, this kid is going to get eaten up just like I got eaten up. He has great potential. He has great talent. Turn him. And when they turned him, it was phenomenal. It was fantastic. Like I said earlier in the interview, I did go to my father. I went to my father right when the sheets started turning, and they were showing up at the Ramada Inn trying to get fans in outside center stage and handing out posters to say Erik sucks and Erik does this and Erik does that, and they were getting all their little sheet reading friends at certain arenas to go to Kinko's and make copies of things. I sat there and told my dad, I think we need to turn me heel. Again, my father said, who's booking, you or me? I said, sorry, I'm out of here. I'm not, discussion over. I'm not questioning my father, on his choices. He's made more talent and more stars than anybody else, point blank period, per year that he's booked. Per year, he has produced more talent than anybody else. I'm not going to question the master. I threw in my 2 cents. My 2 cents wasn't, they didn't think it was the right 2 cents at the time, and so we went on. No big deal.
Yeah, and of course, in hindsight, it's easy to say that your dad was wrong, and he was wrong. But at the time, I'm not any wrestling expert. I would have probably agreed with your dad. So, it's unfortunate. And then I really think you were positioned in a way, and again, with hindsight, that you could have been a really big star in the business. Did your dad subscribe to the wrestling sheets, or did he just hate those things?
Well, let me say this too, which has never been talked about, ever been talked about. My father at the time, let me ask you this. This will show most people their knowledge, and you may be right on. How long did you think my father was there during my 2-year career, or 2.5-year career at WCW? How much of that do you think my dad was there?
I think about 10 months your dad was there.
Okay, and it's about the 10th month, if that's right. What had happened was when I was coming in and saying, turn me heel, my father has so much talent and insight that he knew that he was going so against the grain, because when he came in, as I'm sure he talked about in his interview, from what I understand, he came in for many objectives. Cost cutting, understanding the bottom line, not losing $10 million a year. My dad was a business owner, so he wasn't just a booker, wasn't just a talent, but he was a business owner. So he had many objectives, and not all those made the boys happy. If you think about it, hey, no more top rope, The boys weren't pissed about that. The boys weren't mad about taking up the mats. The guys that knew how to work worked around it. What the guys were upset about was the contract negotiations, more days on the road, kayfabe, heels and baby faces weren't to hang out, weren't to go out, weren't to ride in separate cars. They were upset about their lifestyle being changed, okay? They had that being upset. The Titan Towers, which separated WCW to TBS, my dad was made the president of WCW. Most people don't understand that. When Eric Bischoff took over, he was the vice president, and that was a thorn in his side for a long time. My dad wore New Balance shoes, jeans, and a shirt, basically, where every other executive in TBS had to wear a jacket, suit, and coat. And he came in there like John Wayne. There weren't a lot of people happy on the other side. I mean, when you've got Bill Watts coming in as the president, and he's making more than every officer at TBS, than Ted Turner himself, you're causing an issue amongst the legal department, personnel management, and all the people at TBS. It wasn't just WCW. It was a effect that went across the whole board. Those people talked to each other. So I want to clarify that. And when I went to my father at the time, he said, I believe my time will be limited here. Therefore, if I put you into a new gimmick and change you, when I leave, I don't want the issues I'm going through to hinder your love and your career. And that's the truth. That's what Bill Watts absolutely said. He goes, I know your love for the business, but son, you will be looked upon and you'll be judged by me, and I'm going to do my best. That's why Erik Watts stayed as a babyface, stayed in kind of the role of what he had. It wasn't my father. I guarantee if my father truly felt that he was going to be there 2, 3, 4, 5 years, he would have taken me as a heel, and it would have been fantastic. It would have been awesome. But my dad knew what was going on. But my dad was smart enough to make sure that his contract read that, was compensated for that, and he did what he was supposed to do, man.
Erik, let me ask you a question. You mentioned that the real upset was about the contracts, and I'm thinking back, and I think you're right. I remember Brian Pillman and a few others, and I wonder if some of the guys whose contracts were being cut were actually contacts for the Sheets, and that really triggered the negative reaction to your dad, because I remember the Sheets vaguely talking a lot about the contracts and how the guys were upset, and I just wonder how objective a sheet is when it's based on a contact's pay grade.
Well, of course, the Sheets are gonna paint it to look how it needs to look. I mean, are you ribbing me? These guys, the major contacts, are the ones that try to put the pressure on Bill Watts at WCW, are the same sheet contact people that put the pressure on him and asked for him at WWE and put the pressure on him at WWE. It's not about whether Bill Watts is up to date, not up to date, man. Rules and principles and basics and fundamentals, they stick with you for life. What wrestling doesn't have anymore, we don't have any fundamentals. We have no rules. We have no foundation. That's what they need back. Will we get it? I don't know. Will wrestling go on? Yes, it will. Bill Watts was that foundation, okay? But yes, there was a lot of pressure because when, everyone thought, all right, we're going to get Bill Watts in. He's a mastermind. He's a genius. Whoop, hold on just a second. You mean to tell me I just can't call TBS and tell them my fingernail hurts and I can't show up for the show? Do you mean that I can't I can't ride with my opponent to the town and talk about the match? You mean tell me we can't be in the bar afterwards and hang out? Well, I mean, we have to ride separate airplanes. I mean, when my dad we had to ride separate airplanes. So it was a culture shock for many of these people, man.
Right, because that your phone. Okay, they had been spoiled under the previous administration. The previous administration had failed. Erik, one thing I'm not clear on, and you may know or you may not know because you were only there for a short period of time as your father came in and then you went forward after your dad left. Was the business actually getting better with your dad there, or was he a bit frustrated?
Business, bottom line, was better if you knew the background. I mean, you went from a multi-million-dollar loser every year in, year out, to break even. So from a business standpoint, from paid people, not papered, from what was going on in the background, I mean, I got to see some major stuff happen. WCW was completely different and will always be from WWE locker rooms, but the competitive nature at WCW in the locker locker room was unbelievable. Bar none, the closest thing to coming to a shoot sport. I mean, these guys felt like they were the best. Don't tread on their water, don't tread on their space, and every night they were competing for the job. Not because they had a locked-in contract. Every night they were competing for the job. And I haven't seen that in a long, long time. I mean, for a short period of time, my time at TNA, when I first went to TNA, it reminded me of that. And it was so awesome because isn't that the true nature of the sport, is that every night you're supposed to compete to the best of your ability, and at any night you could be the best or you could be taken out by anyone else.
So,
and that gives you your drive, man.
So 1992 to 2009, you've been active, and you're telling me that at that point in time, the attitude in the locker room, 1992 was the best you've ever seen, the most competitive you've seen in your entire history?
Oh my God! I mean, people would throw chairs. I remember Scott Steiner walking in one night and forearming one of those hand dryers off a wall. I mean, there were boys getting just outraged at each other, fights in the locker rooms. Everybody would sit out and peek out the curtain and watch every match and critique it and just. I mean, it was, most people would go, well, what fun is that? The fun part about it is every night there would be a challenge who would have the best match. Period. Every night there was a challenge. So people could go, well, in a corporate standing, that doesn't seem too healthy. Let me tell you something. We are paid athletes. If you want to see a whole bunch of bored people, go check out the guaranteed contracts in pro football. Then parallel them to the guys that have the league minimum or are just trying to make the team. There's competition, and that's how it was with WCW. I mean, we had some guys, come on. I mean, we know Sting, and we know some guys, which I think they deserved it, to have guaranteed contracts. But minus those guys, there weren't a whole bunch of cool heads in the locker room because everyone was trying to make more money, and you were being scrutinized night by night by night. And I don't think that was there before my father was there. I don't think you had the Grizzly Smiths and the different agents, the Grahams and the Gagnes on the road giving a daily grade every day. And you had that at WCW.
If the people at Turner had a brain and kept your dad in charge, which is what should have happened, what do you think? Have you ever thought about what would have developed over the years? Do you think your dad would still be with them today? Do you think that WCW would have to exist today, but I doubt your dad would have let it die the way Bischoff and company did. What do you think would have happened if they had really been committed to your dad?
You know, man, I'll say this tongue in cheek. If I had a crystal ball, I'd be even more wealthy with the stock market, and I would have known when to jump out of my marriage with my wife. That's for sure. But going back, I love my kids, grateful for my kids. So it's kind of that. I don't know if you see the parallel. With my father, I'm grateful that my father was there. Hindsight, do I think that if my father stayed, how successful would it have been? You know, I think that I personally think that it would have been tremendously successful. I think it would have had Vince on the brink of going under, which I wouldn't want to see. I believe in competition. I believe competition breeds success. But I don't know in today's world if Bill Watts, if you really look at it, Bill Watts and Ted Turner, which Ted Turner is one of the biggest wrestling fans in the world, believe it or not. I don't know if you know that, but he is one of the biggest wrestling fans in the world. I do not know if Ted Turner, Bill Watts, no matter how big WCW got, would have outlasted the Time Warner takeover of TBS, because Time Warner absolutely said we have no interest in pro wrestling. If WWE would have been there, they would have shut it down.
Well, those guys, AOL, in fact, they could have screwed up anything. I mean, the incompetence was so great. That's a good point. So your dad might have made it up until around 2001, 2, and that probably, well, who knows? I mean,
it probably would have been sold off to someone, maybe.
Yeah.
But if not, it would have been done away with. I'm telling you, it could have been Vince McMahon's company, and if AOL Time Warner had the leverage they had, they would have shut it down. They absolutely went through it with a fine-tooth comb and said, we have absolutely no interest in pro wrestling. It didn't have to do with a profit. It didn't have to do with a loss. They said no interest at all. That just wasn't their target market.
Yeah, and we see what's happened to the company ever since. Now, and not that form of WCW should have been kept. The Sheets painted your dad as a racist. How difficult was that for you to accept?
Well, you know what's kind of funny is when you really think about it, I don't really have a hate towards anybody at all. I just see ignorance everywhere. It just cracks me up, even the question being asked, because I guess no one really knew our upbringing. No one knew where we came from. No one knew what was going on in our lives. I mean, I came from a school called Bixby High School, man, and there was like 3,000, high school students, and it was a big school, but I mean, that's where they filmed Tex and Rumblefish and stuff, so it was a very country school. We didn't look at blacks as minorities. We in Oklahoma, we looked as though the people that were being most mistreated were American Indians, and people don't get that. I mean, when you're sitting there with the Navajo Nation and the Choctaw and Chickasha and all that, you're brought up like they're the people that were run off their land. They were put on reservations, so forth and so on. My mother escaped a communist country at 7. Her father died in the escape. She lived in concentration camps for 7 years. And for those of the people that don't understand, they were called deportation camps, which they transferred after massacring the Jews. So there are still the bones. There are still the incineraries. There are still all this. People are trying to feed people through fences, okay? They lived there 7 years before they got sponsored by a Methodist church out of Oklahoma to come over. So racism had no place in our house because we were so international. My dad's mother was 100. Cowboy Bill Watts' mother, it was 100% in American Indian. 100%. His dad was 100% British. My mom was 100% Estonian. So we didn't have that place for it. My dad's best friend was Ernie the Cat Ladd. His best friend was Ernie the Cat Ladd. My best friend that I just lost last year was a guy named Damian Dothard. He wrestled as Damian Steele. It's not to be cool. It's not to brag about. But when people want to sit there and throw that card, it is so idiotic. And what the sheets don't understand is that the sheets, the slashing, which cracks me up, is when my dad first got to TBS, Hank Aaron wanted to hang out with my dad, and my dad was the greatest guy in the world, and buddy. It was nothing more than, from what I remember, nothing more than a news report that came out from someone interviewing my dad about how he felt about ownership and having your right as an owner of a company. What can you do? And from what I remember, my dad basically said, in America, the freedom of being American is if you want to sit there and own a company and you want all people under 5'4" to work for you, all people above 6 feet, all white, all black, all Mexican, that's up to you. If that's what you want to do, the beauty of being an owner and owning your own business and the land of opportunity is that you can do as you see fit to be as successful as you can be. There is no racial slur or tone to that. I mean, that's ignorant. I mean, if you look down my dad's career at Junkyard Dogs and Savannah Jacks and Ron Simmons and everybody else, if you could bring Junkyard Dog from the grave, if you could bring Big Cat Ernie Ladd from the grave, those are the people that need to be interviewed. That would kill the criticism right there, because a racist is the last thing my father is.
Well, Erik,
but that's how that's what the sheets need to do to try to bury him. So
I know, and I just want to make a point, and that's we've had over 160 guests here on 57talk.com, and many times yours truly has had to go in after the interview and do a little editing because comments are made by some of the guys about certain, just use your imagination. I got to go in and edit it out because I can't go over the air, obviously. Your dad, sure. I interviewed him for 8 hours. You didn't have to edit anything, okay? Your dad was, just true. All these claims from the sheets, it's ridiculous stuff, and it's kind of sad. And then they bitch and moan that there's not a business anymore, and the one last opportunity, I believe, for old school wrestling to survive would have been in 92 when your dad was in charge of WCW, and they helped get rid of him. So, we're in the situation we're in now, partially thanks to them.
Well, and don't forget, there was a short period of time in 95, 96 when my father was at WWE and the same thing basically happened. I mean, I don't know, too many people don't cover that, but I was in the locker room. I know that, I'm not going to put the two wrestlers' names on air, but your your most major, most influential powers, wrestlers at WWE come up to me in a locker room and they said, Erik, please give us your dad's number. I said, you guys can get my dad's number anytime you want. They go, no, please ask him to accept our call. And I called my father. One had worked for my father in Mid-South. One had been at WCW, in which my dad, I believe, made his career. My dad at the time had offered him double his contract and said, kid, leave. You're the only 6'11" job guy I've seen. WCW beat beat you up so bad before I got here that, yes, I'll double your contract. Yes, you're a hard worker. Yes, I will double your contract if that's what you want to be. If you want to be an oversized jobber. But if not, don't take this contract, leave, and go somewhere else and come back. And thank God he did. He went and made millions at WWE. He's a TNA now. The other guy's still at WWE, and one of their best. They asked me for my father's number, and if the respect of me calling my dad, I did call my dad. I did, and they said, please, we need him here. Now, from that point on, I was so busy on the road that I didn't know anything about deals or not deals, but I think roughly 6 months, 7 months after those phone calls were made, my father was the head booker at WWE, and everything was going fantastic. You could tell the TVs were different. I, at the time, had moved out of WWE and went down to Memphis for a while so that I didn't have to have the same riffraff as at the WCW, because I was so excited when I went to WWE. I knew it was all on my own. You know, I went and tried out. I made the tryout. Vince offered me the contract. Matter of fact, Vince out of his own mouth said, Erik Watts, I'm hiring you. I want Erik Watts to be a part of WWF. This has nothing to do with second generation, third generation. I mean, it's nothing like today. Today there's some great second, third generation wrestlers, but I would have been hired today probably based just on my heritage. Then I went there on a name of my own. But being that said, what's so funny is I heard basically what happened at WWE is my dad's pulling the old school in, and it's fantastic, and the ratings are there, and everyone's enjoying it. And my dad at the time, you know, during certain parts of his booking, if the babyface won, a lot of times the babyface at the end of the show would still be left laying. Even if they won the match, they'd be left laying a lot of times. And certain baby faces, and it just so happens that I heard the exact two that were so interested in him coming to WWE were the two that were pushing to say, no, let him be in control of everyone else's angles, but not ours. And from what I understand, that's basically how my dad and Vince split ways. Vince came up and basically said, you know, listen, I need control of one or two of the athletes and their finishes. And my father said, that's not our deal. I'm either in total control of the TV booking or not. And from what I understand, Vince goes, Bill, if I was working for you, would you let that happen? And my dad goes, no, but I'm not. You're not working for me. I'm working for you, and the way I came in was that I'd have total control, because if you had total control of it and you were being so successful, you wouldn't need me right now. And it wasn't a bantering or a bad thing. Vince and my father, from what I understand, actually shook hands, and I think Vince was like, Bill, you know, we're just two bulls, and two bulls don't work well, you know, in the same room. And my dad's like, agreed, and left on good terms. But my dad was a head writer. I mean, that's how so much stuff changed up there at WWE. I mean, was with my father there. So it wasn't just CW, it was WWE too.
That was a bad agreement for the fans, because I see what ensued. But was it difficult for you? I've asked your dad this, but I'll ask it from your point of view as well. Was it difficult for him after leaving, because that was probably going to be the end of his time in the wrestling business?
Wow, you know, I mean, these questions are so weird, because you'd think, me and my father, I mean, most of your wrestling families are pretty rough and tumble families, and with that being said, my dad was always a drill sergeant type persona. I mean, when everyone else was going out after a Friday night football game in high school, my dad, when he was in town, made me come review the highlights, review the game film of my high school game, and then if I had time between then and 12 o'clock to go out, I could. And most of the time, you know, if your football game stopped at 9:30 and you're playing at home, if I could get home by 10:30, I'd be doing good. If I'm reviewing the game, there's no way I can review the game by midnight, so I'm not going out with all the guys. I'm not going out with all the buddies. But the one thing my dad said is the eye in the sky never lies. You know, we need to review this when it's fresh on your mind. And I did that even when I was first starting at WCW. I had to tape every one of my matches and review every one of my matches. Why I'm saying that is that my father, I don't think, has ever been a man of fear and or regret. Therefore, I don't think that he would care whether it was his last day or that he had 1,000 days ahead of him. He's still going to live that day the same way. He's going to book it the same way. He's going to be the same person. So I don't think he would change much in his life. You know, but being that said, I'm not the one that he would discuss it with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, basically, you didn't really talk to him.
He'd have to call me up and say, "Oh, son, you know, me and Vince got into it," or "Oh, son, Hank Aaron and a group of people got upset because of a racial." Nah, he could give a crap less, because he's so honed in on who he is and what he believes in. He could give two craps less, because because he knows what he believes in, you know?
Yeah. Okay, Eric, I'm going to ask you the nepotism question, and I'm going to ask it a little different than the others might, and that is, why is it not nepotism for Shane McMahon to have the position that he recently gave up, to have the position that he had with WWE, yet it is nepotism that your dad might have given you just a little bit of a little break, and now you're telling me Dusty Rhodes was actually the one to call you. Why is it okay or cool for Shane, but not cool for Erik?
Well, I think you've got major changes. When I came on the scene, wrestling was at such a level as far as TV. You know, because had that been when I came into WCW, I remember Dustin Rhodes and Barry Windham coming up to me and Dustin hugging me. I've known Dustin forever, and hugging me. He goes, "Thank God you're here." And I thought he was being like, "Hey, yeah, you know, just like old times." You know, he goes, "Now the heat's on you, not on me." So he had been I think Dustin was a great worker and is a great worker. I think he was getting a lot of heat prior to me coming. Therefore, with my dad, you know, his dad was a booker. My dad became the president, so the focus went on me and as an athlete, in which you could critique week in and week out. I'm sitting there on TV. I'm performing week in and week out. Whereas Shane, which I will say this, the time in which I spent at WWE, he actually did some of the speeches like to the wrestlers as far as they would have an annual meeting on profit and loss, and I was blown away. I thought that kid was one of the most professional kids I've ever been around. Now, I don't know him other than that, but man, he was so well-spoken. I think that there probably would have been a lot more heat had Shane done more wrestling. I think that his dad sprinkled him in just enough to cover him up, and I think that the majority of the time he was, you know, executive or on the board or his position was in the office. Therefore, I don't think people focused on it as much. I mean, I believe that if my dad brought me in as an agent at WCW, it wouldn't have gotten near the focus. But it's just different. It's just different timelines, different viewership.
Well, the point I'm trying to make, Erik, is that there's nepotism in everything. You've got Peyton Manning and Eli Manning in the NFL. They were both #1 pick. Of course, Peyton has been incredibly successful, Super Bowl and all the great statistics. Eli Manning, on the other hand, won a Super Bowl, but statistically not all that great. Now, you have to ask yourself, would either of them be in the position they are today if their dad hadn't been Archie Manning? And you might say, well, yeah, sure, they have the talent, but they were brought up in a football environment. You were brought up in a wrestling environment. There's a reason that there's nepotism, because from the time you're a young boy, you're brought up in that environment, so you're naturally a little bit more attuned to it than someone else might be.
Yeah, you know what? I don't know. I mean, I can't concur on that at all. I mean, Todd Marinovich's dad to this day is probably one of the greatest trainer of athletes, even in the UFC today. I mean, and look at him. Well, people, oh, well, it was drugs, it was this, it was that. I mean, he was a blowout. Eli Manning, first of all, I don't know if you've really checked in your sports lately, but up to the third week, he had one of the highest quarterback ratings of any passer in the NFL. I mean, Eli is killing it. He's killing it. I mean, he's doing well. His team is struggling right now, but he's doing well. His brother, we don't even need to talk about, Hall of Famer. They're both going to be Hall of Famers, but I'll tell you what, just because you're born in a house full of athletes that are in the same, that is as crazy as saying your dad's the CEO of ABC Corporation, therefore you're going to be a CEO. I don't believe that. I mean, the nepotism usually comes in when you're talking about hiring of people that have no talent and keeping them in the corporation, which I've seen a lot here in Georgia, as you'll see across the United States. The thing I have to say about nepotism, as far as I'm concerned, is that I've wrestled since 1992. It's 2009. I can take as many bookings today as I did in 2000 right now. I could probably call WWE right now and have a tryout next week. TNA, the same damn thing, and it doesn't have anything to do with my dad. You cannot take 6'6", 270 pounds away from a person that knows how to get over with a crowd. You can't take that away from somebody, period. Now, I will go on the other hand, which will piss a lot of people off, and say, okay, well, if the greatest wrestler of all time, one of the greatest, is Ric Flair, where's David? Now, I don't want to knock David, because I talked to someone about a year and a half ago that said they wrestled him and that he was incredible, that he had come around so far. But I mean, when you look at it, what happened to David? David has brothers, you know. One was an amateur wrestling champion, you know. I mean, why doesn't that correlate with the Flair family?
Yeah, but but Eric, my point is solid, and that is that David Flair got the opportunity because his dad was in the business. Whether or not he had the talent, that's secondary. He had the opportunity. Something happened to take away the opportunity. Part of the reason you're 6'6" is because of your dad's genetics that made him so good in wrestling, right?
Well, I mean, part of my genetics is 6'6", but I was a quarterback all through high school and all through college. I mean, how many quarterbacks do you know at 260? I'm not arguing that genetics of my mom and my dad had something to play. You're absolutely right. And David got a chance. But let me tell you something. Don't forget, in this industry, I can bring up a million more examples of people that have gotten a shot of wrestling by earning it in much different ways than being athletic. Okay? I mean, I know guys. I mean, you go back in the 70s and 80s, and you tell me how many guys graduate high school. You go into the 90s, tell me how many guys had went to a football or on scholarship. Not many of them. Not many of them. And I'll tell you what, I know a lot of guys that are your world champions over and over and over that were bag boys that had no talent and made it in the business. You know, Arn Anderson. I mean, of all people, it was a bag boy. So I'm not. I don't know how you get your shot and whom you get your shot with has nothing to do with it. It has more to do with it. Are you worthy of that shot? And yes, it did take a negative toll on me because of who my father was, because he was that great. Just as Michael Jordan's son is having problems, I'm sure, while he's playing basketball. But I still can perform. I can still wrestle. So to all those naysayers and those people that were upset and, oh, the only reason, what are they saying now? Why am I one of the most asked for interviews in pro wrestling? Is it because of my father or is it because of Erik Watts? I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I will tell you, and that is that I saw you in TNA in 2004. I remember you were on one of the pay-per-views. I was watching it with my wife, and you're so inundated with Erik Watts can't wrestle over the years, and I had kind of lost track of your career. You know, you kind of start to almost think that way in a way, and I saw you on the pay-per-view, and I remember you look great, and I thought to myself, man, if this guy had gotten a real legitimate opportunity, why wouldn't he have been just a big star in the business? And I remember that very clearly. So
yeah, no, you're 100%. When you were asking me about the nepotism, what I mean is you're absolutely right. Had I come under a different name and no one knew who my father was, would I have been in wrestling, made it, and been more successful? Probably so. Would it have taken me a little longer to get there? I don't think so. I don't really think so, because at the time in which I came to WCW, it was at the time of college athletes and pro athletes. You know, I mean, a lot of these guys that are critics forget that I had quite a resume. I pulled myself from the NFL draft. I mean, my agents were pissed. They knew that I was either going to Tampa to back up to Berg. They knew the teams in which wanted me. I had Jimmy Johnson on the phone asking me about Dallas Cowboys, and that's when they were stacked with Aikman and Ware and all those people. So, I mean, I was going pro football. I loved wrestling so much, I took myself out. So I think that if I was just a wrestling fan, loved wrestling, with my academics, with my athletics, I still probably would have made it bigger. However, the one thing I'll never take back is the fact that how proud I am of my father and my mother and the Federation and what all they've done for wrestling, because he's a legend. Wrestling wouldn't be what it is without him. So sometimes in life you got to take some of the good with the bad. If it cost me a little of my career due to the fact of that, it doesn't take away any bit of how proud I was sitting in Houston with my son, my daughter, my sister, her son, sitting 5 rows back watching our father be inducted in the Hall of Fame. There's nothing better. Forget my career. Forget everything else. That right there was intense. It was awesome. So I'll take the good with the bad.
Right. And the point is there is some good with the bad. In fact, I think you would have been a bigger star if it hadn't been for your father on all that involvement with the sheets and everything. On the other hand, you might not even have known what professional wrestling was if it wasn't for your father. So it's all scrambled together. But I think the point that I'm making is just that if you grow up with your dad, you understand the business your dad's in, and if your dad's successful in a business, any business, there are opportunities there because you're his son, and it's just that. Now you're an exception because you were such a big athlete, such a great athlete. So there are shades of gray there.
And let me tell you something else that was helpful that I can't even put a dollar figure on, is that my father was so successful as a business person. So you are right that it flowed over in many ways. I mean, I remember sitting in the back and me and Pillman mainly, we would be talking about things, and it was almost like, remember the old E.F. Hutton commercials?
When E.F. Hutton talks, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of how it was. I mean, we were talking to the boys about tax cuts, and I was talking about SEP plans and IRAs, and I mean, these guys looked at us like we were cuckoo. I mean, I remember my first check, I'd already split it up into what goes into my bank account, what goes into a savings account, what goes into a SEP account, what goes into, my stock portfolio. When I first came out of college, because of my age, I knew that I wanted 35% of mine high risk, 25% of mine medium risk, and 40% low risk, and put in blue chips. I knew that when I came out of college. I was driving a 944 turbo Porsche with $40,000 worth of stereo system in it my freshman year in college, and I was sitting there making over $60,000 a year in a network marketing company, selling nutritional supplements. So as far as business manner, at 14 I had my own fireworks stand and distribution company in Oklahoma. So you are right. My father's and my mother's business sense flowed over to every one of us kids. My sister, me, my brother. So we got all that. On the wrestling end, it just kind of stunk because, yes, I did. I got beat up pretty good because of who my father was. But you are right. I mean, the blessings coming from and my dad sitting there talking to me, going, Jesus, what? This guy right here was a multimillionaire 10 times and has filed bankruptcy 3 times, son. Don't do that. Don't do this. Well, watch your money. You can't go out to every pay-per-view and have a good pay-per-view and buy the bar of beers. You can't do it. So I did get to see a lot of really cool stuff from my dad's vantage point, and I got to see, I got to learn a lot from other people's disasters. So that was really cool.
Erik, I'm going to ask one more question, and we're going to close. Do you want to go back to WWE?
I don't know. I really don't. I mean, I wish I could give you a direct answer to that. When I was at WrestleMania, I got to hear, and I didn't see it firsthand, but I heard how they, had like 5 or 6 extra rings, and all the guys had to go through it and move by move, and everyone had to be on these time cues. And I guess wrestling has gotten so big that that's the way it's got to be. I can't imagine Vince telling Shawn Michaels and Undertaker, I need to know every one of your spots. But and I'm not saying he did, but for most of the matches I heard that he had to know every one of your intricate moves. I don't know that that's a whole different type of wrestling, and people don't know that. That's a whole new world of wrestling. Would I love to go out and show what I can do with all my knowledge and all my experience in pro wrestling and show it off to the WWE fans and make them happy? Hell yes. And you saw some of that at TNA. Jerry Jarrett and the people there, Vince Russo, they took the chains off me and said, just go say and do whatever you want. And it was probably one of the funnest times of my life, the biggest crowd reactions, good and bad. And so, yeah, I would kind of like to, a part of me wants to go back and go in there because I know what I can do. I know what an asset I could be for them, and I would love to do it as for the sport of wrestling. On the other side, do I want to sit there with all the political BS and propaganda and wade myself through it? I don't know if I have the same zest about that anymore.
TNA?
Well, no, I'm saying with WWE, I don't know with WWE.
Right, any chance of you coming into TNA, or do you just want to work independence? I know nobody knows what the future holds, but what do you have a little?
No. TNA would be TNA. I would look. TNA. I would be more than happy to go back to. I don't know whether the door's open there because I've had a few comments on some of my shows about how Jeff Jarrett dealt with me and stuff like that. But I don't think he's a issue there anymore. TNA. I think they're going to go to Monday night. I think that they're going to have a spark power for the next 3 or 4 months. I don't care what anyone says about Vince Russo. I know that as a mentor to me and as a writer, he wrote. I mean, he never wrote anything for me, but he mentored me as close as anyone else. Jerry Jarrett did. TNA, I would love to go back to. I'd like to go back on a national platform. Right now, I'm taking bookings independently, and I'm already packed through February just to knock the rust off me, so that if I decide to go back in January or February to WWE or TNA, I'm in shape. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm preparing myself for if I want to make a comeback. And if I do, you'll know probably February of next year whether I go to WWE or TNA.
Well, I hope you get the opportunity because you definitely have the talent. And it's, I think you could have been a big star. And it's kind of sad. And the same with your dad as far as I think he could have had a major influence on wrestling through the 1990s and even into the 2000s. So I just hope somehow something breaks for you because you do deserve it, Erik, and it's been a pleasure having you on 57talk.com.
Man, I'll tell you what, probably the best interview I've ever done with someone that's really did their homework. Thank you. You made it good for me, and I had a lot of fun. I hope all your fans enjoyed it. And one last thing that I always say on all my interviews: if people love the wrestling, if they love seeing what you talk about, the foundation of wrestling, the old school wrestling, go to universalwrestling.com. I know you had my mom on, but www.universalwrestling.com. We've got all the Mid-South Universal Wrestling Library, greatest hits, and man, you can get your fix and check out some of even today's people there. Promo, but more than that, to me, I get to go every day to our studio and pull out a tape. You would love it. We got house shows, and I just pull it out and put it in and just reminisce, and that's the real deal, and it's really fun.
www.universalwrestling.com. I will get the link up on the site. We've got to just get that set up, but I do appreciate it again, Erik, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks so much. You too.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.